The Author. Written by Joshua Berthelette. And read by Christopher Roberts.
Chapter 1, The Man Who Writes in Shadows. Barry Crewell wasn't the kind of man you forgot. There was something magnetic about him, something unsettling, like the world bent slightly out of place when he entered a room. He had the look of someone who knew more than he let on, and who didn't particularly care if you knew it. His dark eyes carried the weight of 1,000 untold stories, the kind that left scars even in the telling. His hands, rough and calloused from years of work, moved like he was still piecing together broken fragments of something long lost. His voice? Gruff. A little hoarse. The kind of voice that belonged to a man who had lived through things he didn't talk about, things you didn't want to ask about. He wasn't a celebrity in the traditional sense. No curated public image, no endless social media posts, no flashing cameras. Barry had never wanted the spotlight. But when you create a character like the Shadow Man, the world doesn't give you a choice. 15 years in the game. 15 years of writing horror so sharp it made your skin crawl. His first few books had flopped, ignored, ridiculed, left to rot on the shelves. He knew rejection, knew the silence of a blank page mocking him. He was nobody. But he kept writing. Kept pushing through the doubt, the loneliness. And then, when the world least expected it, he introduced the Shadow Man. A dark, haunting figure who whispered in the night, always just out of reach but never truly gone. Not just a character, a warning. A reflection of Barry's own demons clawing their way to the surface. Readers couldn't get enough of it. His name exploded overnight. Books sold out. His signings drew crowds that wrapped around city blocks. And his stories began following people into their own nightmares. Fame, though, had never been Barry's goal. He didn't want the accolades or the fanfare. He just wanted to write. But fame clings to you, especially when your work cuts deep. The world wanted the Shadow Man, and by extension, they wanted him. And now, standing backstage at The Tonight Show, he was reminded exactly why he hated all of it. Chapter 2, The Interview. Barry paced the narrow green room like a caged lion. Every step echoed frustration, the old wooden floor creaking under his boots. He stopped abruptly, fists clenched, and shot a glare at his agent, Mike, who was slouched in a chair, scrolling through his phone. "Tell me again, Mike," Barry growled, voice low and dangerous, "why I'm about to go out there and play clown for Fallon instead of talking about my damn book." Mike looked up, trying, and failing, to mask his nervousness. "Barry, we've been over this. Late-night audiences want something fun. You go in heavy with the whole dark literary genius thing, and they'll tune out. This is about connecting." Barry's jaw tightened. Connecting? Connecting? His voice was edged with incredulity. "I poured 5 years into this book. And you want me to sit on that couch and talk about, what? My dog's Instagram account?" Mike winced. "Come on, Barry. Fallon's audience eats that stuff up. 15 minutes of charm, then you plug the book." Barry stopped dead, fixing him with a glare that could peel paint off the walls. "Charm? I don't do charm, Mike. I do truth. Raw, unfiltered, ugly truth. If they can't handle that, they shouldn't have invited me." Mike sighed, standing up, hands raised in surrender. Okay. Just, don't go full Braveheart out there, all right? We don't need another incident like last year." Barry's lips curled into a smirk, something between amusement and fury flashing in his eyes. That reporter deserved it. "You print lies, you get consequences." Mike shook his head. "Consequences don't sell books, Barry." Barry stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "Neither does being a puppet." He grabbed a worn copy of his book, edges frayed, pages dog-eared, and turned toward the stage entrance. A pale-faced stagehand peeked in. Mr. Cruel? They're ready for you. Barry adjusted his jacket, exhaling sharply. He glanced back at Mike, his eyes cold. If Fallon tries to make me dance, I'm walking. And you? You're fired. Without waiting for a response, he strode into the blinding lights of the stage.
Chapter 3, The Fallout. The roar of the audience buzzed through the studio. Barry Cruel stepped onto the stage with slow, deliberate steps, no waving, no fake grin, just a man carrying the weight of stories and scars. The applause softened as the crowd took him in. Rugged. Intense. Like a storm rolling in. Jimmy Fallon grinned wide, extending a hand. Barry. Welcome to the show. Barry took the handshake, firm and unyielding, holding Jimmy's gaze just a second longer than necessary. Jimmy, he said, voice gravelly. Let's skip the small talk. The audience chuckled, sensing the tension. Jimmy's smile faltered. Oh, okay, straight to business. I like it. Barry leaned back in the chair, crossing one leg over the other, scanning the audience like he was daring someone to look away. Your latest book is already a bestseller, Jimmy said quickly, trying to ease the mood. Congrats on that, by the way. Barry gave a curt nod. It should be. Took 5 years and half my sanity. The audience chuckled nervously. Jimmy grinned, leaning in. Speaking of sanity. I hear you had quite the personal year. Something about a nasty divorce? Laughter rippled through the crowd. A light-hearted jab. A joke. Barry didn't laugh. His jaw clenched. The air shifted, heavy, suffocating. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice quiet but sharp as a blade. Yeah, Barry said. Real funny, Jimmy. The most painful chapter of my life, turned into a punchline. The audience fell silent. Jimmy's smile flickered. Hey, I didn't mean. You didn't mean, Barry cut him off. His voice was rising, his presence suffocating. But you did. You thought you'd get a cheap laugh. Guess what? My ex-wife doesn't think it's funny. My kids don't think it's funny. And neither do I. The tension was unbearable. Jimmy shifted in his seat, scrambling for control. Look, Barry, I'm sorry if. Barry stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The audience gasped. You want to talk about something real? We talk about the book. About the truth people are too scared to face. But if you're here for cheap laughs. He glanced around, his glare sweeping the room. You've got the wrong guest. Jimmy forced a nervous chuckle. Oh, of course. Let's talk about the book. Whispers of the Forgotten, right? Barry stared him down for another long moment, then slowly sat back down. Yeah. Let's. The interview continued. Awkward. Uncomfortable. And by the time it was over, Barry knew exactly what was coming next. By morning, his name was everywhere. Author meltdown, a celebrity interview gone wrong. The Tonight Show, a tense walk-off. Barry Cruel's career suicide. Barry stared at his phone, headlines flashing across the screen. His fingers clenched around the whiskey bottle. Maybe this was what he wanted all along. Or maybe. The Shadow Man wasn't just in his books anymore. Barry's fingers drummed aimlessly on the desk, the glow of the screen casting harsh shadows across his face. The blinking cursor taunted him, a silent enemy he couldn't defeat. His chair creaked as he leaned back, exhaustion weighing him down, making it harder to focus. Beside him, a half-empty bottle of whiskey caught the dim light from the desk lamp. Without thinking, he reached for it, twisting the cap off with practiced ease. A long swig burned its way down his throat, sharp, unforgiving. The only thing that cut through the fog clouding his mind. He grabbed the remote and flicked on the TV. Maybe the noise would help clear his thoughts. Instead, his own face filled the screen, plastered across every damn news channel like a ghost haunting him. Will Barry Cruel rise from the ashes of his last failure? An anchor mused, her smile too wide, too fake, like they were all in on a joke he wasn't in on. Once a literary icon, now a recluse, has fame crushed him? Another voice, this one dripping with cynicism, as the camera zoomed in on a blurry old photo of him at a book event, back when his eyes still held a spark. Can Cruel still write the way he used to, or is the pressure finally too much? Barry scowled, taking another swig from the bottle. The whiskey burned, but not as much as the way they said his name, like a brand, a commodity, something to be dissected. He used to love this. The attention. The anticipation. The world hanging on his next move. But now? Now it felt like they were all just waiting for him to fail. The flickering screen filled the room, each voice stacking on top of the last, suffocating. He gripped the bottle tighter, knuckles white, then slammed it onto the desk. The glass clinked sharply against the wood, the sound ringing in the silence. "God damn it," he muttered, rubbing his face, feeling the thick stubble of neglect. His reflection stared back at him from the dark screen of his laptop. He barely recognized himself. Worn. Hollow. A man who had been something once and wasn't sure if he still was. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Just right. Anything. Nothing came. The screen remained empty. The words refused him. The voices from the TV droned on. Where is Barry Cruel's new book? He sneered, grabbed the bottle, and took another swig. It didn't matter. Not the book. Not the expectations. Nothing mattered except the next drink. Barry didn't hear the knock at first. His mind was too deep in the fog, and the whiskey bottle had started to feel like the only friend who didn't expect anything from him. He was halfway through his third drink when the sound of heavy footsteps shattered the silence. The door swung open, slamming against the wall. Sylvia. She stood there in a tailored suit, sharp as ever, her gaze sweeping the disaster of a room, empty bottles, crumpled food wrappers, the glow of the TV where his face was plastered across the screen like a ghost haunting himself. "Barry," she snapped, voice cutting through the thick air like a blade. "Your phone exists. Try using it." Barry barely stirred, still slouched in his chair, eyes locked on the screen. "Waiting for me to save myself." Sylvia's gaze flicked from the TV to the bottle in his hand. Then, to the second, half-empty one on the desk. She let out a slow, measured breath. This is how you're handling it." "I'm handling it just fine," Barry muttered, his words slurring at the edges. He gripped the bottle tighter, not looking at her. "Real well, actually." Sylvia didn't flinch. She crossed the room, ripped the bottle from his grasp, and slammed it down on the desk with a hard thud. "Get it together." Her voice was low, steady, lethal. "The world is watching, and you're here getting drunk in front of a goddamn highlight reel of your failures." She gestured at the mess, bottles, stale fast food, the ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts. "This isn't you. You're better than this." Barry finally looked at her. Bloodshot eyes. Shadows under them deep enough to drown in. He could feel her disappointment pressing into him, even through the alcohol. "Better than this?" His laugh was hollow. "Sylvia, you don't get it." He ran a hand through his unkempt hair, frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. "Everyone's waiting for me to write a damn masterpiece, and I can't even get past the first word." Her posture softened, just barely, but there was no room for sympathy. "You won't find it at the bottom of a bottle," she said, tone sharp as ever. "You're Barry Cruel. I didn't sign you because you were a one-hit wonder." Barry clenched his jaw. "The pressure. It's all on me." "Tell that to the TV," he muttered, nodding toward the screen, where the headlines still dissected his so-called comeback. She rolled her eyes. The TV doesn't matter. What matters is you. You have a story in you. You're not washed up. She stepped closer, voice lowering, words turning into something heavier. Something real. But you need to stop this. Stop the self-pity. You're wasting it. Barry swallowed, shoving the bottle away. For the first time in weeks, he didn't reach for it again. Okay, he said, the word barely making it past his lips. He let out a breath, a bitter chuckle escaping. But, Sylvia. I don't even know what to write anymore. It's like the words are just gone. She studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, finally, she let out a small sigh. They're in there, she said. You just need to stop running from them. Barry stared at the blank page on his laptop, the cursor blinking like a dare. Sylvia took a step back, giving him space. I'll leave you alone for now. But you have a deadline. Don't forget that. With that, she turned and walked toward the door. As it clicked shut behind her, Barry's eyes drifted back to the TV. His face was still there, still waiting. But now, instead of resentment, there was something else. A spark. Faint, but there. For the first time in a long while, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, he could find a way out of this. But only if he could get past the damn wall in his head. Barry staggered out of his office and into the night, the cold air biting against his skin. He barely felt it. His body moved on autopilot, the weight of whiskey and exhaustion dulling everything except the steady throb of anger behind his eyes. He slid into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut. The engine roared to life, a sound too loud in the empty silence. He gripped the wheel like a lifeline, knuckles white, heart pounding. He took another swig from the bottle beside him, the burn searing down his throat, numbing the jagged edges of regret that had been slicing him apart for years. He pressed his foot down. Hard. The car shot forward, tires screeching against the pavement. Streetlights blurred into streaks of yellow and white as he tore through the city, faster, faster. The road was empty, just him and the asphalt stretching endlessly ahead, an open vein waiting to be cut. His vision wavered. The whiskey in his blood pulsed with every beat of his heart, quickening, dragging him under. He let out a sharp laugh, humorless, reckless. Hell, what's one more mistake? He swallowed another mouthful of whiskey, letting the fire spread through his chest, drowning everything else out. The steering wheel vibrated beneath his hands, the tires struggling to grip the pavement as he pushed the car past its limits. Then, like a goddamn idiot, he looked away. Just for a second. His eyes flicked toward the bottle beside him. And that's when it happened. The wheel jerked violently in his grip. His headlights caught something, a flash of wood, a glimpse of peeling paint, but it was too late. A sickening crack. The impact hit like a freight train. The car slammed into the wooden pole, metal twisting, glass shattering, the world snapping into chaos. His body lurched forward, then back, a blinding pain exploding in his ribs as the seatbelt cut into him. Then, silence. For a long moment, he just existed in the wreckage, the stench of gasoline thick in the air, smoke curling from the hood. His head lolled to the side. The bottle was gone, thrown somewhere in the crash. Blood dripped down his forehead, warm and sticky. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Barry let out a breath, shallow, unsteady. His vision swam, black spots creeping in at the edges. Maybe he was already dead. He wasn't sure. When he came to, blinding white light burned through his eyelids. A groan clawed its way up his throat as he tried to move, but his body refused. Pain shot through his chest, sharp and unforgiving. His breath hitched. Sweat slicked his hands, and the weight of what he'd done crashed down on him, heavy as a grave. Somewhere nearby, a voice. You're lucky you didn't kill yourself. Or someone else. Barry blinked, vision swimming. A woman stood at his bedside, nurse's scrubs, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Lucky. Yeah. That was one way to put it. He swallowed, his throat raw. Guess I'll have to try harder next time, he muttered, voice hoarse. The nurse's eyes didn't waver. Next time, you might not get another chance. Barry let his head fall back against the pillow, staring up at the ceiling. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the room, counting each second he was still alive. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure how he felt about that. Chapter 4, The Letters. Barry barely registered Sylvia's words at first. His head was still clouded, and the hangover from last night's wreck was digging into his skull like a dull knife. You listening? She pressed, arms crossed, watching him from across the room. Because this is big. He exhaled, rubbing his temples. Yeah. What is it? She tossed a thick envelope onto his desk. It landed with a soft thud, an old-school, handwritten letter, no return address. Just his name. Another fan letter? Barry muttered. Great. That makes, what, 10,000? Sylvia's lips tightened. This one's different. Barry frowned and grabbed the envelope, flipping it over. The handwriting was elegant, almost old-fashioned. Something about it made his skin prickle. It's from someone who calls themselves Mr. Goodnight, Sylvia continued. Which, correct me if I'm wrong, is a name straight out of the 𝚑𝚑𝚘𝚎 series. Barry's stomach twisted. Mr. Goodnight. A name from the books that made him famous. A whisper in the dark, a figure who lived between the lines of nightmares. Barry swallowed and tore open the envelope. The letter inside was written in careful, deliberate strokes, the ink dark against the crisp paper. Mr. Cruel. I want to thank you. You showed me the way. They never understood, did they? The weight of the shadows, the whispers in the night. But I do. And I know what must be done. So I'm doing it. You write the stories, but I bring them to life. Isn't that what you need, Barry? A little reality to inspire your words. You've been lost, struggling, but I'll help you. I'll make it real. I know you saw me that night. I saw you too. We crashed together. That means something. You made him. Now, I am him. With admiration. Mr. Goodnight. Barry's fingers tightened around the letter. His pulse hammered against his ribs. What the hell is this? He muttered, rereading the words. Sylvia watched him carefully. Like I said. Different. Barry leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. The crash. He remembered the headlights, the impact, the blur of motion before everything went dark. He never considered the possibility that someone else had been in the wreck. And now, that someone thought they were Mr. Goodnight. Sylvia hesitated, then pulled something else from her bag, a second letter. This one was smaller, thinner. She tossed it onto the desk. He wrote another one. This time, he sent a photo. Barry reached for it, dread curling in his gut. He unfolded the note first. You created me. So now, I create for you. Beneath it was a grainy, black and white photograph. A woman. Bound to a chair. A blindfold covering her eyes. A single candle flickered in the corner of the frame, casting deep, shifting shadows across the room. Barry's breath caught. His own words, straight from the 𝚑𝚑𝚘𝚎, were scrawled across the wall behind her. Darkness doesn't need permission. It just comes. He slammed the letter down, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. Sylvia's voice was steady but urgent. This isn't just some nutjob writing creepy fan mail, Barry. He's reenacting scenes from your books. Barry pressed a hand to his forehead, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just a letter. It was a warning. A challenge. Mr. Goodnight wasn't done. And Barry had no choice but to follow the story.